Russian formalism. What is formalism? Formalism is a school of literary criticism and literary theory, having mainly to do with structural purposes of a particular text. This type of literary theory and analysis originated in Moscow and St. Petersburg in the second decade of the 20th century. In the beginning, opponents of this movement applied the term formalism derogatorily because of its focus on the formal patterns and technical devices of literature, to the exclusion of its subject matter and social values. Later on, it became a neutral designation. Among the leading representatives of the movement were Boris Eichenbaum, Victor Shklovsky, and Roman Jakobson. When this critical mood was suppressed by the Soviets in the early 1930s, because they had felt that this movement was devoted only to elitist art, the center of the formalist study of literature moved to Czechoslovakia, where it was continued, especially by the members of the Prague Linguistic Circle, which included Roman Jakobson, who had emigrated from Russia, Jan Mukarovsky, and René Welek. Both Jakobson and Welek in the 1940s joined American universities. Formalism views literature primarily as a specialized mode of language and proposes a fundamental opposition between the literary or poetical use of language and the ordinary or practical use of language. According to this theory, the central function of ordinary language is to communicate to auditors a message or information by references to the world existing outside of language. In contrast, this theory conceives literary language to be self-focused, in that its function is not to convey information, but by making in extrinsic references, but to offer the reader a special mode of experience by drawing attention to its own formal features, that is, to the qualities and internal relations of the linguistic signs themselves. Linguistics of literature differs from linguistics of practical discourse because its laws are oriented towards producing the distinctive features that formalists call literariness. As Jakobson wrote in 1921, the object of study in literary science is not literature but literariness. That is, what makes a given work a literary one. The literariness of a work, as Jan Mukarovsky, a member of the Prague Circle of Linguistics, described it in the 1920s, consists in the maximum foregrounding of the utterance, that is, the foregrounding of the art of expression, the act of speech itself. To foreground something means to bring it into the highest prominence, to make it dominant in perception. By backgrounding the referential aspect and the logical connections in language, poetry makes the words themselves palpable as phonic signs. The primary aim of literature in this foregrounding, its linguistic medium, as Victor Shklovsky put it in his formulation, is to estrange or defamiliarize. That is, by disrupting the modes of ordinary language or discourse. Literature makes strange the world of everyday perception and renewing the reader's lost capacity for fresh sensations. Coleridge, in his Biographia Literaria, written in 1817, had described the prime merit of a literary genius to be the representation of familiar objects, so as to evoke the freshness of sensation. But whereas the Romantic critics had stressed the author's ability to express a fresh mode of experiencing the world, the formalist stresses the function of purely literary devices to produce the effect of freshness in the reader's experience of a literary work. The foregrounded properties or the artistic choices which estrange poetic language are often described as deviations from ordinary language. Such deviation, which have been most fully analyzed by Roman Jakobson, consist primarily in setting up and also violating patterns in the sound and syntax of poetic language, including patterns in speech sound, grammatical constructions, rhythm, rhyme, and stanza forms, and also setting up prominent recurrence of key words or images. Some of the most fruitful works of Jakobson and others, valid outside the formalist perspective, has been in the analysis of meter and of the repetitions of sound in alliteration and rhymes. These features of poetry they regard not as supplementary adornments of the meaning, but as effecting a reorganization of language on the semantic as well as the phonic and syntactic levels. Formalists have also made influential contributions to the theory of prose fiction. With respect to this genre, the central formalist distinction is between the story, the simple enumeration of a chronological sequence of events, and a plot. An author is said to transform the raw material of a story into a literary plot by the use of a variety of devices that violate sequence and deform and dehumanize the story elements. The effect is to foreground the narrative medium and devices themselves, and in this way to disrupt what had been our standard response to the subject matter. American New Criticism, although it developed independently, is sometimes called formalist because, like European formalism, it stresses the analysis of literary work as a self-sufficient verbal entity. constituted by internal relations and independent of references either to the state of the mind of the author or to the external world. It also, like European formalism, conceives poetry as a special mode of language, whose distinctive features are defined in terms of their systematic opposition to practical or scientific language. But unlike the European formalists, the American new critics did not apply the science of linguistics as poetry, and their emphasis was not on a work as constituted by linguistic devices for achieving specifically literary effects, but on the complex interplay within a work of ironic, paradoxical, and metaphoric meanings around a humanly important theme. The main influence of Russian and Czech formalism on American criticism has been in the development of stylistics and narratology. Jakobson and Todorev have been influential in introducing formalist concepts and methods into French structuralism. Strong opposition to formalism, both in its European and American varieties, has been voiced by some Marxist critics who view it as a product of a reactionary ideology, and more recently by proponents of reader response criticism, speech act theory, and new historicism. These last three types of criticism all reject the view that there is a sharp and definable division between ordinary language and literary language. To conclude, the formalists aimed at enhancing the reader's capability to read literary texts in the appropriate way, appreciating its literary, that is, artistic features and qualities. Ultimately, formalism seems to have had some effect on psychological research also, since immediate experience is one of its primary ideals.